I think most of the space with AI now is driven towards achieving accuracy and how close you can get to human intent and the goals that the user's trying to achieve. So I think that's in any domain that's been the focus for most people. And I think for how that impacts podcasting and content creation, the ideal case is just in the part of
This is Recorded Content, a podcast for small, scrappy B2B marketing teams who want to get the most out of podcasting. In each episode, we'll explore how podcasting can drive your company's content strategy, build brand awareness, and help you connect with your ideal customers. Let's get to it.
Hey, this is Ben. I'm the managing director of podcasting at Motion and your host for this episode of Recorded Content. Recorded Content is brought to you by Motion, a done-for-you podcast agency for small, scrappy B2B tech marketers. Today, I have David Salib on the show, and David is the CEO and co-founder at Momento, which is an AI-powered content marketing platform for producing high-quality video and text content for social media and SEO. I wanted to bring David on to talk about AI and how it can be used to enhance your podcast and content marketing in general. David, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm a bit of an AI rookie and probably a little bit late to the game in comparison to others and, certainly yourself, but I find it fascinating, the more I dig into it and think about, what it can be applied to. And, you've certainly found an interesting way to apply it to content creation, but can you just walk through kind of what led you down this path of creating Memento?
Yeah, absolutely. It started from a very, very deep love for podcasts. And my brother and I, who co-founded the company, we listen to so many podcasts on a monthly basis, and a lot of the podcasts that are not considered popular. And when I tell someone about a podcast I was listening to, they maybe be interested, and I'd be telling them about the episode and recommending they listen to it. But there's this problem where people tend not to have time to check out new content. And they're already committed to a few podcasts that they listen to in those few situations where they get to drive or where they're cooking or doing something where they decide to listen to that podcast. So taking a bet on a new podcast just felt like it's too much to ask for so many people. That's okay if we don't care about people listening to new podcasts, but the downside is I personally thought that these podcasts I was recommending had tons of awesome content for them to learn from or to enjoy or just anything that content really does. And that was frustrating to me. A great podcast about the psychology of time management or a great podcast about I thought it was great. The history of the letter C, just incredible. Shouldn't everyone learn about that? So just that frustration of people not discovering this great content. The creators have frustration because they produce the content. They're hoping someone's going to listen to it. And the listeners, I think, also are missing out. So we realized that at the core of it, the amount of work it takes to really push something out to the world and grow something to an audience is a ton. And the creator already spent so much time setting up the interview or writing the script, recording it, editing it, publishing it, coming up with a title, writing the show notes. By the time they're done all that, they don't have time to do all the marketing work. And, I think Motion is square in the space. You guys help creators be successful with content. And we realized that both agencies and individual creators, if they had a tool that could do a lot of the repetitive work of reaching the audience, writing the engaging content, helping produce a much shorter form content, all the stuff that's around the main content that brings people to that main content, saving time there was just a great way to help achieve that goal of getting that content to be discovered.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of hit the nail on the head, especially with a lot of what we see is we're working with a lot of, smaller marketing teams where, time is obviously is key. And there's a lot of people are being asked to do more with less, right? Especially with current economic climate. But as far as, I guess, kind of going off what you just talked about there, some of the challenges that content creators face that AI can help solve, how does that work from Memento side? I mean, I've had a chance to go into the platform myself and look at it, which I think it's phenomenal. It's certainly interesting the way that you work with not only creating the video clips, but also kind of the show notes, the social aspect of it, as well as the transcripts. But can you talk a little bit about kind of your overall strategy and being able to help these content creators, really distribute their their content in a more seamless manner.
Yeah, absolutely. Our approach is inspired by the approach of the most successful creators. And the most successful creators follow this approach of creating content that's engaging at a 30-second to 1 minute scale, then content's engaging at the 5 minute scale, and content's also engaging at the whole long form scale. Examples of these people are Joe Rogan, Lex Friedman, who else? Trying to his name is slipping me now. But there's a bunch of amazing creators that just have this consistent strategy of distributing their content on different platforms and meeting people where they're at. They also have teams that are really good at picking a great title, optimizing their videos for search, all that kind of stuff. So Memento takes in a full length piece of content. So let's say this interview here is going to go through and identify all the key parts that could be interesting to the audience. This is based on what is most central to the conversation, but also what could be inspired by some trends on the internet, social media, etc. Once it's done that, it can do everything else from that point. It can produce a bunch of short form video for us. We can post that on TikTok and Instagram and start driving views there. It can produce medium length video for us. So we can post that on our YouTube channel. So people just want to listen to a great part of the conversation before they commit to the full episode. They can spend 5 minutes watching that versus having to commit to an hour. And then it'll also write those titles for us, write those show notes. And something I use it for, I'll write an article from the interview so I get SEO content on my blog. And this is what you do if you had this whole team of marketers just doing everything for you, from blogging to short form to medium length, all this stuff. Momento is trying to make all those different tasks just very quick and highly engaging.
Yeah, no, and it's kind of at least what you're talking about here, and what I'm taking from it is, I mean, there's so much content packed into these podcast episodes, and really what AI does and a tool like Memento can do is help kind of make the most out of that without, being a huge time suck almost on, your marketing team. And one of the things that we talked about, and I thought this was really interesting, we had a conversation, I want to say last week, and you had brought up, and when you're somebody who listens to podcasts, right? If you're an avid podcast listener, generally speaking, the people like the Joe Rogans of the world, they've kind of got their own time slot kind of carved out within your day, within your week. So, what have you. And then, if somebody else comes up to you, or maybe you notice another podcast that might be interesting, it's really hard to find, I guess, the time or the stickiness really for, from that podcast standpoint to, carve out kind of their own time within the listeners, listening time, if that makes sense. But as far as like Memento goes, you brought up a really good point with some of the short video clips and being able to utilize those more to really kind of garner some interest there. But can you just kind of, I guess, expand on that and kind of your take on the power of those video clips and how Memento helps with it?
Yeah. I mean, let's forget about Memento for a second and just think about your listener.
Sure.
And this person's on Instagram scrolling at least for an hour a day. Your listeners are definitely on social media for a few hours a day, probably at least an hour. It's ironic that these apps have been so successful, they've had to create features to help you spend less time on them. That's I think a whole different level of success. So your listeners somewhere on social media, and they're just scrolling through, and that's like where most of your listeners are going to be for sure. Now, can you reach them while they're there? Let's say you do. Let's say you get a great clip from your interview. It's an incredibly informative piece of information, or a really heartfelt part of the conversation, and they see it. From there, your hope is to drive more subscription or listenership to your ultimate brand, right? Now, if people are hoping that as soon as they see that clip, they're going to go open Spotify, turn on the podcast episode, leave Instagram, and just start listening, they're not connected to the flow, because you wouldn't do that yourself. You wouldn't find a great podcast like, oh yeah, I'm going to sit on the couch now and just listen to this podcast. So when we think about the flow and how people are going to discover a new podcast or any kind of new content, the short form content's there to just generate curiosity and interest. And maybe they'll subscribe to or they'll follow your Instagram page or your YouTube channel at that point. Ideally, there's a beautiful flow where they open your YouTube channel and then go watch a 5-minute segment, then see the whole interview and watch that. That's an incredible experience. But let's be honest, we won't get too many of those kinds of fans. But the ideal case is producing a ton of great content from this hero piece of content, being able to reach them on the platforms they're on, whether that's Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, LinkedIn, becoming a familiar face for them, becoming a trusted source to the point that the next time they're going to be in the car or they're cooking and they need to pick a podcast to listen to, they're actually waiting to listen to that interview that they saw a short clip from. I think that's the key. It's like we're trying to create that anticipation and curiosity for people when they're in a situation where they can be, that spark can be started, that can then carry on in the future to when they want to commit to something to dive deeper into that topic.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's really the key here is really being able to create almost that deeper bond or relationship or connection with the audience. And video is such a powerful way to do that. And that's why, at the top of this, I mentioned I find it so interesting. The more and more I learn about kind of what AI can do and the impact it can have, it's just the reach, the amount that it can actually, automate for you to allow you to do more with less, especially when it comes to sort of like the distribution side of things. But, what are, I guess, some of the concerns that you've seen people have when it comes to actually adopting AI?
The biggest concern I've seen is the risk of AI producing something that's not their voice or is inaccurate. And this is, let's say in Momento's case, that can be in your show notes. It could be in a social post, it could be an article. Now, I think the kind of text that Memento produces for you is short enough that hopefully you have time to read it and you can see if it aligns. And we're actually working on a lot of features that help you fine tune that voice to be more similar to yours and your content. I would make the distinction there's two kinds of AI. There's AI that generates things and creates things for you, whether it's text or images or videos or voices. And that's a whole space on its own. But there's also AI that selects things, and there's AI that classifies things. And with Momento, the first step is, can we find the most interesting parts of your content first? And that kind of AI doesn't have as much of a risk. The biggest risk there is probably bias to what it selects. And if it selects things that are more biased to a certain kind of audience, if that's not explicitly defined. Again, a space where we're trying to bring more customization and user impact, user influence to, so that you can choose the direction you want AI to work for you in. But I think that biggest risk is like the uncertainty of what AI can do. Human review is always going to be super key here. Even when you think about like automation, manufacturing, QA, quality assurance has always been a part of that. I think we're as humans, we're going to get really good at letting machines do things for us and then being really critical thinkers on what it's producing and what we want to share.
Yeah, yeah, and that's one of the things that we've seen as well is, hey, it's not always going to be this complete, fail safe where everything's done for you based off of what AI, generates and turns out. But however, it can get you a lot closer. So, if it's maybe not 100% of the way there, it can be something that's perhaps, 90% of the way there. So, I mean, it's a really interesting point too to bring up that there's two different types of AI when you think about kind of AI that creates something, right? And then AI that also selects something. So I guess what do you think, or what in your opinion is the best way or the most effective way for podcasters specifically to implement AI within their content creation and content distribution strategy?
I'll tell you a secret from what I'm seeing with some of the Momento users. I don't think many people know about AI. I think when it comes to using an AI tool, the thinking you do before you use the tool is the most valuable effort, I think. Because if you come to the tool with a nuanced perspective on who your audience is, or a nuanced understanding of your brand and your content and what you're trying to achieve with it, when you use that tool, you're going to get something that no one else gets. You're going to be able to describe to AI who you're trying to reach and what they care about. And I think the more work you can do coming to an AI tool, whatever it is, whether it's Momento or ChatGPT or anything that comes out by the time this episode's published, that human thinking coming to the machine and then letting the machine amplify that, that's, I think, how you get the most leverage out of AI tools moving forward.
Gotcha. So where do you think people, I guess, kind of get turned off or turned away from it? Where do you think that they like fail or fall down? Because I've seen a number of different tools, right? And some of them I really like, and other ones I kind of stray away from. But what do you think it is, that kind of turns people away from AI when they, first get, I guess, their first exposure to it?
Well, the flip side to that question is what turns them on to AI when they discover it. And I think we saw that with ChatGPT is you use ChatGPT and it really just worked. It actually answered the questions. It actually wrote stories in the tone of Shakespeare. It actually did it. So I think when it works for them and their expectations, the expectations the user comes into aligns with what the product or the AI provides. That's the ultimate success. I think the hesitations come where they don't feel like one, what it produces is human like, which is a very high standard to put on technology to produce human like things, but that's the promise. So I think when people come in with that expectation, doesn't meet the expectation, they move on. And then I think the other thing we've seen is if the tool that's being provided doesn't give enough control over the output. ChatGPT is great because you have this ability to converse with it and ask it to change, which I think is one of the reasons it succeeded. It was easy to say, you are wrong. Give me something that's funnier. Give me something that's actually more accurate. And now with all the new AI tools coming out, if they're not conversational, or if there's other parts of it that are not purely conversational, if the tool's too restrictive, I think people say, well, this is nice, but I feel like it's doing it for me and I can't change it. So it's no longer going to be a tool I could use on a regular basis.
Yeah, and that's so one of the things I actually saw within your platform was like the different, I think it was different personalities. Is that right?
Mhm.
Where you could basically select, a list of different almost like AI personalities to have like the chat conversation with. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We saw that people had different writing styles and they would be prompting with a specific approach or style of writing. So we
Mhm.
wanted to make it easier for people to choose the style they're looking to write in and just make that the way the AI writes for them.
Interesting. Yeah, and that's wild. That's something I just hadn't seen before. But where I guess where do you see AI kind of going in like towards, in the future and what the future looks like for AI? And then I guess as a follow-up to that, how do you think that kind of affects, podcasting and content creation?
I think most of the space with AI now is driven towards achieving accuracy and how close you can get to human intent and the goals that the user's trying to achieve. So I think that's in any domain that's been the focus for most people. And I think for how that impacts podcasting and content creation, the ideal case is just in the part of take a step back. The podcasting content creation space starts all the way from ideating all the way to distributing. And in the middle, you've got recording and editing and all the stuff that you do. So I think we'll find AI tools that help across the entire spectrum. There'll be tools that help you think of questions for your interview. There'll be tools that maybe edit your episode for you. I don't think there'll be tools that record for you per se. I mean, you'll probably see things in Riverside and Squadcast that do some auto leveling and whatnot, but that's probably not going to be the most impressive thing you see. There is a crazy world where you could be having AI hosts that interview you, AI voices that fill for you or even speak for you. Who knows how that's going to really perform? There's a big question on how humans will respond to synthetically created content like that. So I don't. I think just a big experimental space. But in everything that's not replacing the human in terms of the creation, actual being the face or the voice, I think we'll see assistance across that workflow, and that will help speed up the process. It will increase creativity and help people jump over some of the hurdles that maybe some of the more professional creators have already overcome. I think that'll be a huge advantage for people, less stumbling around, more just getting the message out and succeeding.
Right, right. And so one of the things that's interesting when you think about like the AI that kind of like more of like selection based AI. So kind of selecting like, hey, what are the highlights of this episode that you've actually, kind of uploaded? I guess how does that work? How does AI how is it able to kind of select the highlights? And the reason I ask is because it's certainly interesting when you think about, hey, what are some of the things that are really resonating or might really resonate with my audience or some of the things that might have been more impactful when it comes to like topic selection for future episodes moving forward.
Well, would you mind if I maybe turn the question back to you for a second?
Sure.
When you or someone on your team gets an episode to work on, how do you pick what are the most interesting parts?
Yeah, it's a fair question. So I mean, the best way that we kind of figure out, hey, like what are some of the most interesting parts is just, kind of that aha moment. What is it that we think, I guess, our listeners, that we have defined in our own mind is going to be, most important to them, what's going to resonate with them. And then also kind of based off of some of the feedback that we've received in the past, whether that's through, social media or some of the higher kind of, I guess, hit rates on some of the blog posts and things like that that we've written in the past, but usually we kind of use that as a guide to figure out, hey, well, what's the highlights of this episode? Which I'm kind of understanding as I'm talking through this that might be where you're going. Is that right?
In part, I think there's a subsequent question of like what is an aha moment or what is something that resonates. Like as a human, we do this thing that we put ourselves in the shoes of someone else and we try to mirror their interests and then make a decision based on that. And I think that works. And we've had to think about this question a lot of how do you program software to artificially have intelligence to understand what an aha moment is. What we do is we take a look at the overall story arc. And if this story is about, how dogs like to play fetch, and someone's really going into all the details and the kind of grass they like and the color of the ball, there's there's central concepts from that overall story arc. And AI is really good at doing that. It can take this overall arc and say, okay, I know that here's all the topics in this whole episode. Where are these things central? And this is what this whole innovation of the AI has been, is that AI has been able to model language. And we say AI, another common way to talk about the modern form of AI is large language models, or LLMs. And large language models have a modeling of our English language and other languages. And as part of modeling a language, you start to model the sentiments of the language, start to model the semantics, the meaning behind certain things. Now, don't get me wrong, AI doesn't understand anything really. All it's doing is modeling it. So it doesn't have a brain where it can actually understand things. But statistically, it can predict things based on the modeling it's done on everything it's seen. You bring all that together into, again, how do you pick the best moments? We are asking the AI to look for central concepts. We're asking it to look for funny things. We're asking it to look for question and answer. We're defining our own heuristics for what is an aha moment, and then letting this large language model go on top of that and make some of that selection, along with some other stuff we do that's more in-house. So that's essentially how you can find what's interesting. But then we also tack that on with the ability to pick things yourself. So if AI finds something at minute 7 that's interesting, but you really think that minute 8 was more interesting, you at least save the time of jumping over to 7, deciding that that's actually not interesting. That decision in itself is valuable. And now you're at minute 8, and you're making a very convicted decision that I'm actually going to use this. And you still save time. AI can just help you in a very different way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's just wild to kind of see, I guess, where AI has been able to help, and kind of where, it's clearing up some of that time. I mean, I can't tell you. So I actually, and we talked about this before, but in my past, I remember going and actually taking a, recorder, which I still got right here in front of me. But, in
Mhm.
the old days, sitting down and recording it and having to go through and actually transcribe by hand, what everybody said on, an interview, and then picking out those key moments myself, and just, I mean, it would take me hours and hours. And now it's just wild to see that, hey, not only can it help with that, which, I mean, again, it takes away some of that stuff that's not necessarily, it's not really necessarily the creating part of it. It's just automating some of the, almost like that busy work or admin work, if you will, and giving back time to someone like myself or to you, to be able to create more and figure out, hey, how am I going to, one, improve, and then two, how am I going to distribute this and get it out there, as opposed to sitting there spending all this time, figuring out, okay, well, now I got to get through the transcript. I got to pick out the certain points that are the highlights. And then I got to go ahead and, create these video shorts to be able to distribute across different social media platforms and what have you. So I guess, just as we kind of, wrap things up here, I guess, what's the biggest benefit or impact that you've seen AI or Memento have for some of your customers?
That's easy. It's scale and consistency. As a creator, being able to consistently pump out content on a daily basis that's high quality and builds that compounding growth for your whatever channel you're really pushing. Uh, I think that's something that people, you can see, before using Momento could not achieve, and now being able to do in just a few minutes, they're able to unlock that. And that's where you see people going from getting a few shorts that have 50 views to getting 500 views, being able to tweet consistently, post on LinkedIn consistently. And that has just been, that aligns with the goal they have, which is creating content that helps them share their message. And I think that's just been the time saving and the scale you get from having a tool that lets you do this kind of stuff very quickly at high quality. I think that's been the biggest impact people have seen.
Awesome. So I guess if someone's still, not convinced or still on the fence when it comes to utilizing, AI or Memento, I guess, what would you say to them?
Just try it. Momento's free to try, and you'll be able to just upload your episode, see what it does, see what it picks out. Try to predict what you think you'd pick out as interesting, see how the AI compares. Start creating some shorts, start writing some articles, start writing some posts, ask it to write some jokes from your episode, ask it to write some heartfelt poem. Just see what it can do, get creative with it, see it as a tool that you just received and it's going to help you create something new and just see what it does. And if you have any other thoughts, we're always open to feedback. We'd love to hear what you think.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a great spot to end. So where should people go to learn more about you and Memento?
Yeah, just go to trymomento.ai. That's TRYMOMENTO.ai. And you'll be able to get started. And if anyone would like to connect, you can definitely find me on LinkedIn. Happy chat anytime.
Awesome. Well, David, thanks again. Really appreciate you spending some time with me today. It was great having you on Recorded Content.
Thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Recorded Content. This show is produced by Motion, a full-service podcast agency that's all about working with B2B marketers. Starting a podcast is hard, but it doesn't have to be. Visit motionagency.io and get everything you need to launch and grow your customers' favorite show.